I sent my brother and sister $4,000 every month because they said Mom was too sick to stand. I skipped meals, worked double shifts, and let my own bills pile up while they sold our childhood home behind my back. When I came home early for Thanksgiving, I expected a hospital bed, medicine bottles, maybe Mom's weak voice from the hallway. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee in her blue sweater. Then she looked at me like I was the one who vanished and asked, "Why did you stop loving me?" That was their first lie. I wasn't the kind of daughter who forgot to call. That's what made their story so easy to believe and so hard to forgive. My life in Chicago was measured in 12-hour shifts, vending machine dinners, and the blue glow of my phone at 2:17 a.m. I worked nights on the hospital floor, where the lights never fully turned off and everyone smelled like coffee, sanitizer, and exhaustion. Some mornings, I came home with sock marks around my ankles and dried lotion cracked across my hands from washing them 50 times a shift. Still, before I slept, I checked on Mom. Always. My mother, Margaret Bennett, was 68 and stubborn in the quiet way Midwest mothers can be. She used to say she didn't need help while standing on a chair to reach the top cabinet. After Dad died, she stayed in our old house because leaving it felt like burying him twice. His maple tree was still in the backyard. His tool marks were still on the porch railing. The kitchen table still had a pale burn ring from the year Lydia dropped a hot pie dish on Thanksgiving. That house was not fancy, but it knew us. Mark, my older brother, lived closest. He reminded me of that every chance he got. "I'm the one here." "Claire," he'd say, like geography made him honest. Lydia, my younger sister, had a softer method. She called late, crying just enough to make my chest tighten. Mom had a bad day. She'd whisper, "The bills are getting worse. Mark can't do this alone." So I helped. $4,000 a month started as temporary, then temporary became normal. I picked up extra shifts. I stopped buying lunch at work. I patched my winter coat instead of replacing it. Every payment felt like proof that even from 300 miles away, I was still a good daughter, but the calls with Mom got shorter, then rarer. Mark said she was sleeping. Lydia said the medication made her confused. Once, Mom texted me, "Are you upset with me?" I called immediately. No answer. 10 minutes later, Lydia wrote back from Mom's phone, "She's just emotional today. Don't take it personally." I stared at that message in the dark, my scrubs still smelling like bleach, and felt something small move inside me. Not suspicion yet, just the first quiet knock of fear. By September, Mark stopped saying treatment and started saying expenses. That was the first change. At first, Mom's money was for medication, follow-up visits, and a part-time aide who came by in the mornings. Then Mark said the bathroom needed safety rails. Then the front steps were dangerous. Then the insurance had gaps he never explained twice the same way. Every month, I sent the $4,000, sometimes more. I would sit in my car after a shift, rain tapping the windshield. My phone balanced on my knee while I confirmed another payment. The hospital parking lot always looked loneliest before sunrise. Nurses walking out with their lunch bags, ambulance lights flashing red against wet pavement. Me, telling myself guilt was cheaper than regret. Then Mark brought up selling the house. "It's too much for Mom," he said. "Too old, too many repairs." I stood in my tiny kitchen with a bowl of microwaved soup going cold in front of me. "Dad built half that porch himself," I said. "And Dad isn't here," Mark snapped. That shut me up. Lydia called later, gentler, which somehow hurt worse. "Claire, don't make this emotional. Mom needs stability. I want to talk to her. She's asleep. She's always asleep when I ask." Lydia paused. "Not long, but long enough. She has bad days," she said. A week later, Mom sent another strange message. "I heard you don't want the house anymore." My hands went numb. I called. No answer. I called Mark. No answer. I called Lydia. "She's confused," Lydia said quickly. "The medication messes with her memory." What medication? For anxiety, for everything. "Claire, please don't start." But something had already started. 2 nights before Thanksgiving, after a brutal shift, I found a forwarded notice buried in my email. It was about mail being redirected from our old street. Not a bill, not a warning, just a cold little clue. The house had been sold. I stared at the screen so long the hallway light in my apartment clicked off. When Mark finally answered, he didn't sound guilty, he sounded annoyed. We did what had to be done for Mom. No one told me. You're not here. Claire. That sentence hit harder than yelling. So I booked the earliest way home, bought Mom's favorite pumpkin pie from the grocery store, and drove through sleet with both hands locked on the wheel. I thought I was going home to a sick mother. I was really driving straight into the lie. The kitchen looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because the house was half empty now. The walls had pale rectangles where family photos used to hang. The old rooster clock above the stove was gone. Even the curtains Mom had washed every spring were missing, leaving the window bare against the gray afternoon. But Mom was there, not in bed, not hooked to machines, not too weak to answer a phone. She sat at the kitchen table in her blue sweater, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, steam rising against her face. For a second, neither of us moved. Then her mouth opened. Claire. The pie box slipped in my hands. She stood too fast, wobbled once, and I grabbed her before she could fall. She felt thinner. Yes, fragile, yes, but not gone, not unreachable, not the fading woman Mark and Lydia had described in careful, tragic updates. I hugged her so hard she made a small sound. I've been calling you, I whispered. Mom pulled back, confused. They said you needed space. My throat closed. Who said that her eyes filled? Mark said the bills were too much for you. Lydia said you were exhausted by all of this. She looked down like she was ashamed of needing air. I thought you stopped calling because I became a burden. That was when something in me split cleanly in two. There was the daughter who had spent months blaming herself, and there was the nurse who knew exactly what it looked like when a vulnerable person had been managed, isolated, and fed someone else's story. I set the pie on the counter. Then we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Dad used to carve turkey, and we compared truths. I told her about the $4,000 every month. She stared at me. Claire. I never knew it was that much. She told me she had been walking around the block since July. I told her Mark said she could barely stand. She told me she signed papers because Mark said I agreed the house was too much to keep. I did not scream. Screaming would have warned them. Instead, I took pictures of bills, payment notes, and the sale papers Mom still had in a kitchen drawer. Then I drove to the diner on Main Street, where Mrs. Alvarez touched my wrist and said, "Honey, your mother's been better for months." By nightfall, I had called an elder law attorney. By Thanksgiving morning, Mark thought he was hosting dinner. He had no idea Mom and I were coming together. Mark's new place looked like the kind of home people buy when they want everyone to know they've moved up. Fresh paint, new porch light, a wreath on the door with tiny fake pumpkins tucked into the ribbon. Through the front window, I could see warm lamps, polished floors, and relatives moving around with glasses in their hands like nothing in the world was wrong. Mom stood beside me on the walkway, her coat buttoned wrong at the top. I reached over and fixed it. "You don't have to go in," I said. She looked at the house, then at the pie in my hands. "Yes, I do." The second Mark opened the door. His face changed. It was quick. So quick most people would have missed it. First surprise, then calculation, then the smile. "Mom," he said too loudly. "Claire, we didn't know you were coming together." "That was the point," Mom said. His smile twitched. Behind him, Lydia appeared in a cream sweater, holding a dish towel she did not need. Her eyes went straight to Mom, then to me, then to the pie box like it was evidence. "Oh," she said, "this is unexpected." The house smelled like turkey, butter, rosemary, and the vanilla candle Lydia always lit when she wanted a room to feel softer than it was. In the dining room, my Aunt Carol and two cousins were already seated. They looked at us with polite confusion. The way people look when they've heard one version of a story and the wrong character walks in alive. Mark clapped his hands once. "Well," he said, forcing brightness into his voice, "family's here, that's what matters." No one answered. At the table, Lydia tried to guide Mom into a chair beside her, but Mom stepped toward me instead. Another tiny crack. Mark saw it. So did I. Dinner started with the usual noises: forks scraping plates, ice shifting in glasses, someone passing rolls, Aunt Carol complimenting the sweet potatoes because silence scared her more than lies. Mark sat at the head of the table like he had earned it. Mom sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap. Lydia kept glancing at her phone. I waited. That was the hardest part. Not speaking, not throwing the papers across the table, not asking my brother how he slept in a home paid for by grief and guilt. But Evelyn, the attorney, had been clear. Let them state their story first. Halfway through dinner, Mark lifted his glass. "I know this year has been hard," he began. Lydia lowered her eyes on cue. "We've all had to make sacrifices for Mom. Some decisions were painful, especially with the house. But everything we did because we had to protect her. Protect her." The word landed on the table like a dirty plate. Aunt Carol nodded slowly. "Your mother's been through so much." "She has," I said. Everyone looked at me. I placed the pumpkin pie in the center of the table. Mom's favorite, the one Dad used to buy when he burned his own crust 3 years in a row and finally gave up. My voice came out calm. Then why did Mom think I abandoned her? The room went still. Lydia blinked. What? I looked at her. Why did she think I stopped calling Mark, set down his glass? "Claire, this isn't the time." "It's Thanksgiving," I said. "You said family should talk." His jaw tightened. Mom's voice trembled beside me. "You told me she needed space." Lydia reached for her hand. "Mom, you were confused." Mom pulled away. Not sharply, just enough. Lydia froze like she had been slapped. Mark leaned forward. "Claire, she's had memory issues. You know that. Don't twist this into something ugly." I opened the folder on my lap. "I'm not twisting anything. The papers inside were simple: copies, notes, a timeline, no account numbers, no private addresses. Nothing dramatic enough for Mark to accuse me of making a scene. Just enough truth to make the room colder. I sent about $4,000 every month," I said. "Sometimes more. I was told it was for treatment, home care, safety repairs, and medical bills." Aunt Carol's fork lowered slowly. Mom stared at the table. "She didn't know." I continued. "Not the amount. Not what I was told. Not that I was being asked for more money because everyone kept saying she was getting worse." Mark laughed once, short and angry. "You're a nurse, Claire, not an accountant." "No," I said. "That's why I hired one." Lydia's face drained. I slid the first page toward the center. Some bills were real. Mom was sick. I'm not denying that. But by July, she was walking around the neighborhood. Mrs. Alvarez saw her, twice a week, sometimes more. Meanwhile, I was being told she could barely stand. Mom wiped under her eye with the heel of her hand. Mark pointed at me. "You don't know what it was like here." "You're right," I said, "because you made sure I couldn't know." His mouth opened, but I kept going. I asked for video calls. She was sleeping. I asked to visit. The doctor didn't want stress. I asked about the house. I was told it was too expensive, too unsafe. "Too much for Mom," Lydia whispered. It was too much for who I asked. She flinched. I turned to Mom. "Tell them what you told me." Mom's shoulders shook once, but she sat straighter. "Mark said Claire agreed the house should be sold," she said. "Lydia said Claire was tired, that she loved me, but she couldn't keep carrying all this." Aunt Carol covered her mouth. Lydia started crying then. Real tears. Maybe. But I had learned that tears could be true and still be used as a weapon. "I was scared," Lydia said. "Mark was handling everything. I didn't know what else to do." Mark snapped his head toward her. "Don't!" That single word told the table more than anything in my folder. I looked at him. The house was sold quickly, below what it should have been worth. And the money didn't all go toward Mom's care. His face hardened. "Careful." "No," I said. "You be careful." The room held its breath. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. Evelyn's name was already on the screen. We had agreed she would join only if Mark tried to shut me down. I tapped the call. Her face appeared a moment later, calm, silver-haired, wearing glasses low on her nose. "Good evening," she said. "Mrs. Bennet. Claire." Mark stood. "What the hell is this A boundary?" Mom said quietly. Evelyn spoke before he could recover. "I've sent formal notice requesting preservation of all records related to Mrs. Bennet's finances, the sale of her home, payments received from Claire Bennett, medical bills, and any decisions made under financial authority. Mrs. Bennett will be meeting with independent counsel. No one is to pressure her into signing further paperwork." Lydia cried harder. Mark's anger finally slipped into fear. "You're really doing this," he asked me. "You're dragging your own family through this." I looked around the table, at the turkey going cold, at the pie no one had cut, at my mother, who had spent months thinking her daughter had stopped loving her. "No," I said, "you dragged us here when you sold Mom's house and lied about her illness. I'm just turning on the lights." Mark sat down like his legs had gone weak, Lydia whispered. "You're ruining Thanksgiving." Mom looked at her, tears shining but voice steady. "No," she said. "You ruined it when you made me believe my daughter didn't want me anymore." That was the moment the room changed, not loudly, no screaming, no slammed doors, just truth settling over the table, heavy and final. I opened the pie box, cut one small slice, and placed it in front of Mom. Her hands shook when she picked up the fork. Nobody touched the turkey. Nobody asked Mark to explain, and for the first time in months, my mother looked at me like she finally knew I had been there all along. The weeks after Thanksgiving did not feel like victory. They felt like paperwork, phone calls, and Mom learning how many decisions had been made around her instead of with her. Evelyn moved carefully. She didn't promise miracles. The house sale had already closed, and unwinding something like that wasn't simple, but she requested records from the realtor, reviewed the sale price, and froze the story Mark had been telling before he could change it again. The money was easier to trace. Not emotionally easier, just clearer. Some of what I sent had gone to real care, medication, appointments, a part-time aide in the beginning. But a painful amount had drifted into repairs nobody could explain. Payments that didn't match Mom's needs, and Mark's new life wrapped in fresh paint and better furniture. Lydia claimed she didn't understand. Mark claimed he was overwhelmed. Mom stopped accepting explanations that sounded like excuses. A portion of the money was returned into a protected care account for her. Her medical and financial authority was changed. From then on, no child could move money, sign papers, or speak for her without independent oversight and Mom's clear consent. That mattered more than revenge. Mark stopped calling himself the one who carried the family. People had seen enough. Aunt Carol stopped inviting him to speak first at family dinners. Lydia's tears lost their power once everyone knew what they had covered. I brought Mom to Chicago for a while. My apartment was small, the radiator clicked all night. The kitchen window faced a brick wall, but every evening, Mom sat at my little table with tea, and I called her from the hospital during my break just because I could. One Sunday, we baked pumpkin pie together. The crust tore twice. Mom laughed for the first time without looking guilty. The old house was gone. The maple tree belonged to someone else now. But when Mom reached across the counter and touched my flower-covered hand, I realized they had not taken everything. They took a house. They almost took our truth. But almost was not enough. Months later, I drove past our old street. The house had new curtains. Someone else's car sat in the driveway. The maple tree was still there, bare against the winter sky, holding on the way old things do. I didn't stop. Mom was beside me, humming softly with a pumpkin pie on her lap. Family should never turn love into guilt. Care should never require silence. And being far away does not mean you stopped showing up. If your family ever twisted your love into obligation, share your story in the comments. Someone listening may need it. And subscribe for the next story.